The promise was spoken low, almost swallowed by the wind, but it carried more weight than any oath ever taken in a courthouse. Out on the open prairie, words were not given lightly. A promise meant land, blood, and the kind of faith that kept a person standing when everything else had already fallen away. The rancher stood near the broken fence, hat pulled low, watching the widow struggle across the yard with a bucket that looked too heavy for her thin arms. He did not yet know how deeply her sorrow ran, only that grief had a way of bending a person until they nearly broke. Still, something in the way she kept walking told him she had not given up. Alone against the wide sky, weathered boards creaking like old bones. Cattle grazed in the distance, thin but alive, just like the man who owned them. He had lost plenty himself over the years. The land had taken his father, then his brother, and nearly his will. Ranching was a lonely calling, shaped by dust, storms, and long silences that could drive a weaker soul mad. He understood loss, even if he never spoke of it. When he first saw the widow step down from her wagon, he recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look he saw in the mirror some mornings. She asked for work, not shelter. Her voice was steady, though her fingers trembled. She said she could cook, mend clothes, and tend a small garden if given the chance. The rancher listened without interrupting. He noticed how she kept her shoulders squared, as if daring the world to knock her down again. He noticed the way her gaze never lingered too long on anything, as though attachment itself had become dangerous. Out here, trust was earned slowly, and sometimes never at all. Life on the ranch did not soften for her grief. The days began before sunrise and ended only when the stars took over the sky. She learned the rhythm of the place fast, feeding chickens, hauling water, and keeping the small house warm against cold desert nights. Every task carried a memory of another life, another man, another future that would never be. At night, when the wind rattled the shutters, she lay awake listening to the land breathe, wondering if she had made a mistake coming so far west. But each morning she rose again. Endurance was the only thing grief had not stolen. The rancher watched her quietly. He did not ask questions about her past, nor did he offer comfort in words. Men like him were raised to believe actions mattered more than talk. He fixed the fence she struggled with, left extra food where she would find it, and made sure the horse was well cared for without saying a thing. In the Old West, kindness often wore a rough coat. Still, she felt it. Slowly, cautiously, she began to trust that this place might not take from her the way the world already had. There were moments when the land reminded them both how fragile peace could be. A sudden storm tore across the plains one evening, lightning splitting the sky like an angry hand. The cattle scattered, and the widow found herself alone in the barn, holding the door shut while rain soaked her dress and fear climbed her throat. When the rancher finally reached her, breathless and soaked, their eyes met in the dim light. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. The kind born from shared danger and shared resolve. Stories traveled fast along the frontier, carried by traders and drifters. Whispers reached the ranch of nearby troubles, of men who took more than they earned and left ruin behind them. The widow had already lost everything once. The thought of losing what little stability she had found made her chest tighten. The rancher knew those men too. He had crossed paths with injustice before and learned that silence often invited more cruelty. The Old West was shaped by choices like these, by whether a person stood their ground or turned away. As weeks passed, the widow's laughter returned in small, surprising moments. It startled her when it happened, slipping out while she worked the dough or watched the sunset bleed across the horizon. Each time, guilt followed close behind. Loving life again felt like a betrayal of the man she buried. The rancher saw the conflict in her face and said nothing. He knew that healing did not follow a straight path. Out here, the land taught patience, even when the heart demanded answers. He made the promise one evening as they stood side by side looking out over the range. Trouble was coming, that much was clear. He told her she would not face it alone. He did not dress his words in romance or false hope. He simply said that as long as she stayed on his land, no harm would come to her without him standing in the way. It was not a vow spoken in church or written on paper. It was a rancher's promise, forged by dust, sweat, and the hard truth of frontier life. The widow did not answer right away. Promises had failed her before. Still, something in his steady gaze made her believe this one might be different. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fading gold, she felt the smallest spark of something she thought was long dead, hope. It frightened her more than despair ever had. Loving again meant risking everything she had left. That night the wind carried distant hoofbeats across the plains. Whether they were real or only imagined, neither of them slept. The Old West did not offer gentle beginnings, only hard choices and uncertain tomorrows. As dawn approached, both the rancher and the widow knew that the promise made would soon be tested, and whatever road toward them would change their lives forever. Morning broke thin and pale, the kind of dawn that felt unsure of itself. The widow rose before the light fully reached the yard, her body already trained by loss and labor to wake without comfort. The air carried a chill that slipped through wool and skin alike. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into damp earth. The land looked peaceful, but she had learned not to trust quiet too easily. On the frontier, silence often came before trouble. She moved through her chores with careful hands, each task grounding her. Feeding the chickens, drawing water, sweeping the porch, simple acts kept the memories at bay. When her husband had still been alive, mornings had been filled with talk of plans and small hopes. Those mornings were gone now, buried with him. Here, survival demanded attention. There was no room for drifting thoughts when a single mistake could cost more than pride. The rancher was already awake, working the corral with slow, deliberate movements. He carried the weight of responsibility like a second coat. The cattle had grown restless overnight, spooked by something unseen. He checked tracks along the fence line, his jaw tightening as he studied the ground. Hoofprints cut deep into the soil, unfamiliar ones, not strays. Someone had ridden close in the dark, close enough to watch. He said nothing when the widow joined him, but his eyes told her enough. Danger had a way of announcing itself without words. She felt it in her chest, the old fear stirring again. She had crossed paths with cruel men before, men who believed a woman alone was something to be taken or broken. The frontier was full of such thinking, unspoken but ever present. They worked side by side through the morning, each aware of the other without speaking. The widow noticed how the rancher kept his rifle within reach, how his gaze scanned the horizon more often than usual. She wanted to ask questions, but she had learned that sometimes questions only made fear louder. Instead, she focused on the work, letting sweat and effort quiet her thoughts. As the sun climbed higher, the land revealed its harsh beauty. Rolling grasslands stretched toward distant hills, broken only by scrub and stone. It was a place that demanded strength and offered little mercy. The widow had seen families fail out here, dreams swallowed by drought and debt. She wondered how many broken lives the soil had already claimed, and whether hers would one day join them. During the midday rest, the rancher finally spoke. He told her about the men who sometimes passed through, looking for easy gains, cattle thieves, drifters with nothing to lose. He did not exaggerate the danger, but he did not soften it either. The Old West had taught him that honesty was a form of protection. She listened closely, her hands folded tight in her lap. Each word confirmed what she already feared. She shared some of her own past then, not in detail, but enough. She spoke of the sickness that took her husband, of the slow watching and the helplessness. She spoke of the way neighbors had turned distant once death settled in, as if grief itself were contagious. Out here, weakness invited judgment. The rancher listened without interrupting, his face unreadable but his presence steady. When she finished, he nodded once, as if accepting a truth long known. The afternoon brought heat and dust, and with it tension that refused to fade. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, too far to make out clearly. The rancher stiffened, hand resting near his weapon. The widow's breath caught as she followed his gaze. The rider lingered, watching, then slowly turned away. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. They had been seen. That night, the widow struggled to eat. Every sound outside set her nerves on edge. The wind creaked through the boards and shadows shifted along the walls. She remembered other nights, huddled in fear, waiting for footsteps that never came or came too late. The rancher sat across from her, calm but alert. He told her to rest when she could. Tomorrow might demand more than either of them wanted to give. Sleep came in broken pieces. She dreamed of running across open land, her dress catching on thorns, her breath burning her lungs. Each time she woke, the dark pressed close, heavy and watchful. Before dawn she heard it again, hoofbeats, closer this time. She sat up, heart pounding, listening as the sound faded into silence. When morning finally arrived, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. The rancher confirmed what she feared. More tracks, fresh, whoever watched them before had returned. He began making preparations without drama. He checked supplies, secured doors, and reinforced weak points around the property. The widow offered to help, refusing to be sent away or hidden. Survival had taught her that waiting helplessly was worse than facing danger head-on. As they worked, something between them shifted. Shared fear had a way of pulling people together or tearing them apart. For them, it did both. The widow felt drawn to the rancher's quiet strength, even as she feared what that closeness might cost. Loving again felt like tempting fate. Yet denying the feeling left her hollow, caught between longing and loyalty to the past. The rancher struggled with his own doubts. He had lived long enough alone that companionship felt foreign. Protecting the widow stirred something deep inside him, something he had buried beneath years of solitude. He feared failing her, feared that his promise might prove empty when truly tested. The Old West had no mercy for broken promises. Late that afternoon, a group of riders appeared, stopping just beyond rifle range. They made no move to approach, simply sat there, watching. The widow felt the weight of their gaze like a hand on her back. These men carried themselves with confidence born from cruelty. They believed the land owed them something. The rancher stepped forward, standing tall, a silent challenge in his posture. No shots were fired, no words were exchanged. After a long stretch of stillness, the riders turned and disappeared into the distance. Relief washed through the widow, quickly followed by dread. Men like that did not come merely to look. Whatever they planned, this was only the beginning. As evening fell, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. A storm threatened, its low rumble echoing across the plains. The widow stood at the window, watching the horizon, her reflection pale and uncertain. She wondered how much more she could endure. How many times a heart could be tested before it finally gave way. The rancher joined her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Neither spoke. Words felt too small for the weight pressing down on them both. Outside, the first drops of rain struck the ground, sharp and sudden. The storm was coming, and with it the truth of whether a promise made in quiet could survive the fury of the Old West. The storm did not break the tension. It only pressed it deeper into the land, soaking the soil and leaving everything heavier the next morning. Mud clung to boots, clouds hung low, and the air felt tight, as if the plains themselves were holding their breath. The widow stood at the doorway watching rainwater run in thin lines across the yard. Trouble had not passed with the riders. It had only settled in, patient and waiting. When the rain eased, the rancher saddled his horse. He told her he needed to ride into town for supplies and answers. The town was small, little more than a cluster of buildings clinging to survival the same way people did. Out here, towns could turn against a person as quickly as they could offer help. Rumors traveled faster than truth, and fear often decided who deserved protection. The widow felt a knot tighten in her chest as she watched him ride away. Being left alone again stirred old wounds. Town life carried its own kind of danger. The rancher felt it as soon as he arrived. Eyes followed him, some curious, some cold. He heard whispers before words. People knew about the widow. A woman alone drew attention, and attention brought judgment. Some believed she carried bad fortune. Others believed she was a burden he had taken on foolishly. A few saw opportunity in weakness. At the general store, talk circled around cattle losses and strangers riding at night. No one spoke openly, but everyone listened closely. Frontier justice rarely came from a badge. It came from choices made in moments like these. The rancher sensed pressure building, the town wanting him to solve a problem quietly or step aside. Protecting the widow meant standing against more than just riders in the dark. It meant standing against fear dressed as reason. Outside the store, he saw children lingering near the hitching posts. Thin, dirt-smudged faces, eyes too old for their age. Frontier life did not spare the young. Some had lost parents to sickness, others to violence or the land itself. They watched him with cautious curiosity. He wondered what lessons they were learning from the world around them, whether they were being taught that strength meant cruelty or that endurance could still hold kindness. Back at the ranch, the widow worked through her worry by tending the small garden patch she had started. The soil was stubborn, but green shoots had begun to push through. It felt like a quiet defiance against the harshness around her. As she worked, a memory surfaced of her husband teaching her how to plant back east. The ache came sharp and sudden. Love did not disappear just because life moved forward. It lived alongside new feelings, complicating them. A pair of children appeared near the fence, hesitant. They belonged to a nearby homestead that had been struggling since their father was injured. The widow had seen them watching before, drawn by the smell of food or the sound of life. She waved them closer, offering bread without asking questions. Hunger erased fear quickly. As they ate, she saw the cost of hardship written plainly on their faces. The frontier did not just threaten lives, it shaped futures. When the rancher returned near dusk, his expression told her the truth before he spoke. Town offered no clear help. Some advised him to send the widow away for her own safety. Others hinted that trouble followed her. The words stung, even when repeated gently. The widow listened from the doorway, her shoulders stiff. Being seen as a problem was nothing new, but it still cut deep. That night, a threat from the past surfaced in a way she had hoped never would. A man rode in under cover of darkness, stopping just beyond the yard. He called out her name, the sound dragging her back to places she had fought hard to leave behind. Her blood ran cold. This was a man connected to her former life, one who believed her grief had made her vulnerable. He believed she owed him something. The rancher stepped forward before she could answer. His presence was steady, but anger simmered beneath it. Words were exchanged, sharp and measured. The rider made it clear he would not be easily turned away. He spoke of debts, of promises twisted to serve his own ends. Frontier justice offered little protection against men like this. They thrived in the spaces where law thinned out. The rider left with a warning, his voice carrying through the dark. The widow felt her knees weaken once he was gone. The past had found her again, and it was not alone. She confessed more of her story then, voice shaking but determined. She spoke of manipulation, of threats masked as help, of running west, not just from grief, but from danger. The rancher listened, every word deepening his resolve and his fear. Protecting her now meant more than keeping watch. It meant choosing a side openly. The rancher knew the men circling his land would not stop. They would test him, push him, wait for a mistake. He also knew the town would watch his response closely. In the Old West, a man's choices became his reputation, and his reputation often decided his fate. Days passed under a growing shadow. Supplies ran low, and every ride into town brought new tension. The children from the nearby homestead came more often, drawn by safety as much as food. The widow welcomed them, seeing pieces of herself in their quiet resilience. Their presence raised the stakes. Danger no longer threatened just two lives. It threatened innocence already worn thin by hardship. Town pressure mounted? A meeting was called, voices raised in concern and fear. Some demanded action against the riders. Others suggested compromise, even surrender. Frontier justice was messy, shaped by survival more than fairness. The rancher stood apart, listening, weighing every word. Walking away would be easier. Letting the widow leave might quiet the danger. But promises were not meant to be convenient. The widow felt the strain pulling at her heart. She considered leaving in the night, sparing him and the children the cost of her presence. Love and fear wrestled inside her. Staying meant risking everything. Leaving meant losing the first place that had felt like hope since her husband died. The Old West offered no easy answers, only consequences. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, riders appeared again, closer than before. This time they did not linger at a distance. They rode straight toward the ranch, slow and deliberate. The widow felt her breath catch as she gathered the children inside. The rancher stood in the yard, hand steady on his rifle, heart pounding with the weight of every choice that led to this moment. The past, the town, and the land itself seemed to close in all at once. Whatever came next would not be a warning. It would be a reckoning. The riders did not rush the yard. They slowed as they reached the fence, horses snorting, leather creaking, boots heavy in the stirrups. It was a deliberate cruelty, meant to stretch fear thin and wide. The rancher held his ground, shoulders squared, rifle resting but ready. He could feel the widow watching from the doorway, the children pressed close behind her. The land felt smaller than it ever had, the sky lowered by threat. One rider eased forward, lifting a hand in mock greeting. His smile carried no warmth. He spoke of misunderstandings, of territory and rights, of how trouble followed certain people. His gaze flicked toward the house, lingering. The message was clear enough without being spoken plain. The rancher answered with few words. He did not raise his voice, he did not step back. In the Old West, restraint could be as powerful as force. The riders did not press further that night. They turned away again, leaving churned ground and a promise of return. The silence afterward rang louder than any gunshot. The widow felt her legs tremble as she guided the children to the table, hands busy to keep from shaking. She spoke softly to them, telling them the storm had passed for now. Children learned early out here to hear truth beneath gentle words. When the door was barred and the lamps dimmed, the weight of the moment settled in. The rancher checked every window and hinge, moving with the calm of a man who knew panic wasted time. The widow followed, offering help, refusing to be sent away. She had been hidden before. It had never saved her. Courage, she had learned, sometimes meant staying where fear wanted you gone. They spoke long into the night, voices low. He told her what the town would not. The riders were tied to cattle theft and worse, protected by distance and indifference. Justice here was shaped by who stood together and who stood alone. She told him she would not run again, not without fighting for what little hope she had found. The words surprised them both, heavy with truth. At dawn, the children were sent to the loft with food and blankets. The widow kissed their foreheads, promising she would come back for them before the sun set. Promises came easier when given to the young, even when the heart feared failing them. The rancher watched, jaw tight. Each child was a reminder of stakes that stretched beyond his own life. He rode into town before midday, dust rising behind him like a signal. The meeting was tense, voices sharp with fear and fatigue. Some argued that trouble would pass if left alone. Others demanded action without offering help. The rancher spoke of loyalty, of standing for something even when it cost. He did not ask for bravery he did not share. He asked for neighbors to remember who they were before fear taught them to look away. A few listened, a few turned their eyes down. One man spoke up, recalling a time when the town had stood together and survived. Another followed. It was not enough for certainty, but it was enough to spark movement. Frontier justice was never clean. It came in pieces, built from uneasy alliances and shared risk. Back at the ranch, the widow felt the hours crawl. She kept busy with tasks that needed doing, mending, cooking, tending the fire. Each sound outside set her heart racing. She thought of her husband, of vows spoken with hope and broken by fate. Loving again felt like tempting the land to take more from her. Yet the thought of losing the rancher hurt in a way she could not deny. Memories surfaced unbidden. The man from her past had taught her how fear could wear kindness like a mask. He had promised protection too, once. That promise had turned into a cage. She swore she would never mistake control for care again. Watching the rancher stand against danger without demanding obedience strengthened her resolve. Love, she realized, did not ask for surrender. It asked for trust. The riders returned before sunset, closer and bolder. They rode through the gate this time, hoofs thudding against the earth. The rancher met them halfway, rifle raised but finger steady. Behind him, the widow stood at the doorway, visible by choice. She would not be hidden. The children watched from above, eyes wide, learning lessons they should not have had to learn so soon. Words were exchanged again, sharper now. Accusations flew, claims of ownership and debt twisted to justify cruelty. The rider who had called her name before tried again, his voice carrying false familiarity. The widow answered him herself, voice clear despite the fear clawing at her chest. She denied him publicly, stripping his power of silence. The air shifted. Men who thrived on intimidation hated being seen. A sound rose in the distance, then faint but growing, hooved more riders, coming fast. For a moment no one moved, unsure of whose side they rode for. The rancher felt time stretch thin. Every choice he had made led to this narrowing path. He thought of the promise spoken by the fence, of the weight it carried. He would not step aside now. The town riders arrived in a cloud of dust, faces set with resolve and doubt in equal measure. They did not outnumber the threat by much, but they changed the balance. Frontier justice often depended on witnesses. The riders hesitated, recalculating. Violence here would no longer pass unseen. Tension hung thick, fragile as glass. The widow felt hope flicker, dangerous in its brightness. She did not let it grow too strong. The Old West had taught her that hope could cut as deep as despair when shattered. Still, seeing the rancher backed by others eased something tight in her chest. Sacrifice showed itself in quiet ways. A neighbor stepped forward despite fear, another offered supplies. A third stood watch over the children without being asked. Loyalty was not loud. It was built from small, steady acts that held when grand gestures failed. Night fell slowly, shadows stretching long across the yard. No shots were fired, no blood was spilled. Yet nothing was settled. The riders withdrew again, their retreat marked by promise rather than defeat. The rancher knew they would return when conditions favored them. The widow knew her past had not loosened its grip. As the town riders dispersed, uncertainty settled in their wake. The rancher walked the perimeter, checking fence lines, memorizing every weak point. The widow brought water, her presence a quiet strength. Their hands brushed once briefly, and the contact carried more comfort than words could. Later, with the children asleep and the night deepening, they stood together beneath the stars. The land spread out around them, vast and indifferent. The rancher spoke of what he was willing to give, of risks he accepted without regret. The widow listened, heart aching with gratitude and fear. Love stood before them, tested and trembling, asking more than either had planned to give. Somewhere beyond the hills, men waited. Somewhere in town, courage was still being weighed against fear. The Old West did not bend easily toward happiness. But as the night held them in its quiet, both felt the pull of a future worth fighting for, even if the fight had not yet truly begun. The final return came at dawn, when the sky was just beginning to pale and the land lay quiet beneath a thin veil of mist. The rancher had been awake for hours, sitting near the fence where the promise had first been spoken. He felt it in his bones before he saw it. This time the riders did not linger. They came hard and fast, driven by anger and pride, believing fear would still clear their path. The widow woke the children gently and led them to the safest place she knew, her hand steady despite the pounding of her heart. She whispered reassurances she barely believed herself, pressing their small hands into hers. Frontier life had taught her many things, but it had not stolen her ability to protect. Not anymore. The yard filled with dust and shouting. The rancher stood firm, backed now by neighbors who had chosen to stay. Men from town arrived one by one, rifles visible, faces set. Frontier justice had finally found its spine. The riders slowed when they saw the numbers. They were no longer hunting a lone man and a broken widow. They were facing a community that had decided enough was enough. Words turned heated, accusations were laid bare. The man from the widow's past tried once more to twist the truth, but this time his voice faltered. The widow stepped forward, her fear burning away beneath something stronger. She spoke clearly, telling her story without shame. She named the threats, the manipulation, the lies. Speaking them aloud stripped them of power. Witnesses mattered in the Old West, and now there were many. The rancher added his voice, steady and unyielding. He spoke of stolen cattle, of nights watched and warnings ignored. Others backed him, each truth stacking upon the last. The riders shifted uneasily. They were used to silence, not testimony. Used to shadows, not daylight. When the first gunshot rang out, it shattered the fragile calm, but it did not break resolve. The shot went wide, panic more than intent. In the seconds that followed, choices were made that could not be taken back. Town men moved in unison, surrounding, disarming, forcing surrender. Frontier justice was never gentle, but it could be firm. The riders were taken under guard, their power broken by unity rather than bloodshed. As the dust settled, the widow felt her knees weaken. The rancher reached her just in time, steadying her without words. Relief washed through her, sharp and overwhelming. The children were brought out, clinging to her skirts, eyes wide but safe. Safety was not something the frontier offered often. When it came, it felt like a gift earned through pain. The days that followed were filled with reckoning and repair. Town leaders took responsibility at last, arranging for the riders to be escorted east where law held stronger ground. The widow's past no longer chased her in the dark. It had been faced and named. The rancher stood beside her through every step, his presence a quiet anchor. Life did not suddenly turn easy. The Old West never allowed that. Fences still needed mending. Crops still fought the soil. Loss did not vanish overnight. But something fundamental had changed. Fear no longer ruled their days. Trust, hard-won, began to take its place. The children from the nearby homestead came often, laughter slowly returning to their voices. With help from town, their family found steadier footing. The widow watched them run through the yard one afternoon, sunlight catching their hair, and felt something loosen inside her. The frontier could still raise joy alongside hardship. One evening, as the land glowed gold beneath the setting sun, the rancher asked the widow to walk with him to the fence. The same fence, the same wind. He spoke simply, as he always had. He told her he did not know what the future held, only that he wanted to face it with her. Not out of duty or pity, but because she had become his home as much as the land itself. The widow felt tears rise, not from grief this time, but from recognition. Love had returned to her life not as a sudden fire, but as a steady warmth. She spoke of her fears, of the man she had loved and lost, of the guilt that still whispered in quiet moments. The rancher listened, honoring her past rather than competing with it. Love in the Old West did not erase what came before. It carried it forward with respect. She accepted his promise anew, this time with her own. Not to forget the past, but to live beyond it. Not to hide from hardship, but to face it together. The words felt true as soon as they were spoken. Their union did not come with fanfare. No grand celebration, no polished ceremony. Just neighbors gathered, hands clasped, a shared meal beneath open sky, laughter mixed with tears. Stories were told, promises were witnessed. In a land where survival often overshadowed joy, this felt like quiet victory. As seasons turned, the ranch grew stronger. The widow brought care and life to the home, her resilience shaping every corner. The rancher found himself lighter, no longer carrying the weight alone. Together, they weathered storms, buried old sorrows, and built new memories. Cowboy romance on the frontier was not about grand words. It was about showing up every day, no matter how hard. Years later, travelers passing through would speak of the ranch as a place of fairness and warmth, a place where broken people found footing again. Old American stories often ended in tragedy, but this one carried something more. It carried proof that love could survive the harshest land. On quiet evenings, the widow would stand on the porch, watching the sky darken, the rancher beside her. The land stretched out before them, scarred but beautiful. Frontier life had tested them, shaped them, and finally rewarded them with something rare: peace. In the end, their story became one of those wild West love stories whispered by firelight. A cowboy romance born from loss, hardened by danger, and made strong by choice. A Western drama that did not deny pain, but refused to be ruled by it. Love had not saved them from the Old West. It had taught them how to live within it.